Hi everyone, so today we'll be talking about scansion. And scansion is actually a pretty advanced concept, so if you're in a first or second year Latin course, you could probably just skip this video, because it's often taught in a fourth year Latin course or even in an AP course. There are quite a few ways to scan, and scanning is the act of scansion. But I'm going to teach you the way that I learn and the way that the AP tests you. And I'm going to specifically hone in on Virgil specifically, since that's what the AP tests. But of course, there are always going to be more details to add, more things to pay attention to. But anyways, what exactly is scansion or scanning? Basically, when you scan, you determine the meter of a line. And when you find the meter, it's all about sound. You're determining what syllables you're supposed to stress when you speak the words. And some works of literature don't have any specific meter to them. Usually poetry has meter. But anyways, the main point of meter is determining which syllables in the line are stressed and which syllables are unstressed. And you can also think of it as which syllables are long and which are short. The long syllables are shown by putting a dash over them, and the short are shown by this little swoop. I'll go ahead and show you long and short will have this little swoop or little U looking thing over it. So in Latin, there are two different feet, which is a set of 2 or 3 syllables. Hold on, let me make a little chart. So, in meter, it's divided into feet, and the feet, which is a collection of syllables, are divided into spondees and dactyls. And the spondee consists of 2 long syllables, and that will be dash, dash. And the dactyl consists of 2 short syllables and a long syllable. That'll be, or actually it starts out with the long syllable, 1 long and 2 short. So 1 long and 2 excuse me, thought I was going to sneeze. Okay, 1 long and 2 short. So there are a few rules for scanning a line. And when I say scanning, I mean identifying all of the spondees and the dactyls in the line. So let's establish some steps and some ground rules right now. Okay, so first of all, number 1, rules. Number 1 is all diphthongs are long. And a diphthong is basically when you have 1 or 2 or more syllables that combine to produce one specific syllable. The 2 syllables aren't pronounced separately. So an example in Latin would be how I showed you before. The combination of the A and the E is usually pronounced I. So let me write that down. Examples are I, AU, AE, EU, OE, and sometimes UI, but not always. The second rule is that the final O and the final I of a word are long, and there is an exception to this rule, except for the following words: ego, mihi, tibi, and sibi. Okay, so if you want to know whether it's long, the indicator that it's a long syllable is that it can be a long syllable by its position. And a long syllable by position is when the syllable is followed, or if a vowel is followed, spelled that wrong, followed by two or more consonants. And that will always make it long. Sorry about that. Okay, so the next rule is that it's always long if it's accompanied by an X or a Z. And the next rule is that QU, CH, PH, and TH all count as single consonants. And by the way, thank you very much to my Latin teacher. She has actually consolidated this list of rules, and it's extremely helpful. It's what got me through Scansion in Latin. It just consolidates everything. Okay, so on to the next one. Next rule is that ignore all H's for the purpose of scansion. So that means that you're just going to go ahead and before scanning, the first step is just to cross off all of your H's. Okay, so the next rule is elisions. Elisions. And that means that if a word ends with a vowel or M, and the next word begins with an H or a vowel, the two syllables combine into one single elided syllable. So let me write that again. Elision, if a word ends with a vowel or M, then, and also if the next word begins with an H or a vowel, then the two syllables combine. And that's a really important rule because it takes away a whole syllable out of your line. Okay, so last rule, or second to last rule, is if the second word is S or S and the E in the second word is removed, then the word is combined with the first word. Okay, so if the second word of your line is S or S, second word S or est, then the E in S or est is removed and both words are combined. Okay, so on to our ninth and final rule. And this is specifically for Virgil. It really, really helps. But Virgil is written in a meter called dactylic hexameter. And that tells us three really important points that are key when scanning. First of all, it tells us that the last foot always a spondy. And if you remember, the spondy is just two long syllables. And it also tells us that the second to last foot is always going to be a dactyl. And by default, our third rule that we know is the foot, the first syllable always begins long. Okay, so those are the rules. Now I'm actually going to give you a chart, which may seem confusing right now, but I promise it'll make everything easier when you actually start scanning. And don't get intimidated by the chart. It's pretty scary at first, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I'm going to make 3 columns. This is the syllables per line. 1, 2, 3. This is the number of spondees. And this is the number of dactyls. Okay, so if you have 8 syllables in a line, then you know you must have 4 spondees and 0 dactyls, and it works out mathematically. Okay, so if you have 9 syllables in a line, you're going to have 3 spondees and 1 dactyl. If you have 10 syllables in a line, you're going to have 2 spondees and 2 dactyls. And let me go ahead and extend our chart. And if you have 11 syllables, you are going to have 1 spondee and 3 dactyls. And finally, with 12 syllables, you're going to have 4 spondees you're going to have 0 spondees, and 4 dactyls. And if you notice, when you're starting out, it helps to notice this so that if you're taking a test or something, you can start out by just writing down this chart. But if you notice, it actually goes in descending order. So the spondees go from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 to 0, corresponding to the increasing number of syllables, and the dactyls go inversely. So it goes from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So based on your chart, after you count the number of syllables per line, you can find out how many spondees you should have and how many dactyls. So let's go ahead now and we can do some practice. And I have a couple of lines copied down here. And we can just go ahead and scan these lines. Okay, so if you remember, one of the main rules was that the first syllable is always going to be a long syllable, Anna. And we always start by looking for any elisions, and we just take it line at a time. And I do not see any elisions, so we're just going to, we know the last 2 syllables make up a spondee, so let's go ahead and write that down. Terent, those are both long syllables, and we mark them off by dashes. And somnia, that's going to be a dactyl. So som, ni, a. And there we go. So now we're going to go ahead and count our syllables. Anna, soror, quai, me, suspen, som. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's what I got. So, by the way, it's a really good idea to count on your fingers, do whatever you have to do, count it 3 times if you have to, because if you get the number of syllables wrong, chances are you're going to get the line wrong. And if you get one wrong, then if you get 1 syllable wrong, most of the time you get the entire line wrong. So, let's go back up to our chart. We remember we have 9 syllables, and if we have 9 syllables, then we're going to have 3 spondees and 1 dactyl. So let's go down. We have 3 spondees and 1 dactyl. Okay, so if you remember, we know that diphthongs are always long, and the AE, quai, is going to be a long syllable. And actually what we should have done before is looked for any elisions. And if you remember, an elision is when your word ends in a vowel or M, and the next word begins with an I. So basically what you do for an elision is you cross off that, and you connect it with that little U underneath, so you know that it's become 1 syllable. And if you were to be saying this, you would say suspensinsomnia. That would be how it works. So let's go ahead and go through the line and see if we can identify identify any long syllables by placement, by the fact that 2 different consonants come right after them. So I already see one right now. the U in suspensum, because the U is followed by an SP. Those are both consonants. That must be long. And I also see one in the NS. NS is following in the letter I, so those are two consonants. It must be long. And again, with the E. So we can go ahead and mark this off. That's going to be a spondy. And we can also tell that the letter before this must also be a long mark, because it could either be a spondy and a dactyl, and dactyls end in a short mark. So we're going to go ahead and put a long mark right here and cross it off. And so we have one dactyl left and one spondy. And by default, you can tell that's going to be a short mark and that's going to be a short mark, because the O, the next letters are the R and the Q. Okay, so there we go. It was that easy. And if you want, you can pause the video and you can type or write on a piece of paper this line below, the last two lines, and try it yourself. But I'm going to go ahead and go through them now. And again, we start out by looking for any elisions, and I don't see any. You're looking for the end of the words if they end in a vowel or an M, and I don't see any. So our next task is to put a long mark over the first syllable, and a spondy in the last two syllables, and a dactyl, sedibus, in your last three leading up to that. And it helps to say the last five syllables to make sure it's five. Sedibus hospes, and that is 5 syllables. I just counted on my finger. Okay, so let's go ahead and count. Quis novus hic nostris successit. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And again, it's great to double check. 9 syllables, and as we know, just like before, 3 spondies and 1 dactyl. And we can tell that by looking at our chart. And we'll go ahead, scroll back up to it, right there. 9 syllables, 3 spondies, 1 dactyl. Okay, so let's go back down to our line that we've been scanning. Okay, so we're going to start out by looking for the long marks. And by the way, you can cross off this H, because that's one of the rules. Don't pay attention to any H's. Okay, so just start picking out, see if there are any vowels followed by 2 consonants. I see one here. The U followed by the 2 C's. I see one here. The E followed by the 2 S's, and I see one here. The I followed by the T and the S, and there we make our long mark. I also see one here with the nostris, and plus it would have to be a long mark, since the syllable afterwards is a dactyl, is a long mark, and you can't form a dactyl with a long mark at the end. Okay, and again I see an O followed by an ST, and an I followed by a CN, and we can mark that off. And that leaves us again with the same line, I guess, 2 little short marks there, and it ends up being dactyl, spondy, 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 dactyl, spondy. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's do this last one as well. Actually, I just realized that this last line is the exact same meter as the 2 lines before it, so I think you get the idea. And the best way to practice is just to go through your book, Virgil or other poetry book, and just to pick out a line and scan it. And you can ask your teacher if it's right, and if you want, you can email me your scanning and I can try to tell you if it's right or not. I'll do my best. But anyway, this is with scanning, and I know, of course, it seems very crazy and difficult, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy. You just need to remember your steps and your rules, and especially the last rule about the dactylic hexameter for Virgil is especially helpful. And actually, the chart is not necessary. It was actually made by one of my teacher's older students. He made this chart just by his intuition, but it's extremely helpful. And even if you don't use it to, make your first decision about where all the spondies and dactyls go, I think it's still really a good way to check your work and make sure that you don't have too many spondies or dactyls. And again, I'll say this once, I've said it twice, I'll say it again. You need to check your line, make sure you have the right number of syllables. Like, I don't care if you do it 3 times, because I've done this before. You count the wrong number of syllables, and it's devastating because you get the whole line wrong. Oftentimes it's like 5 points off. Count on your fingers, do whatever you need to do. But there you go, that was Scansion, and thank you for watching.